And welcome to World Fest 2021. This is a celebration of cultures with programs curated by the Caltech Y and ISP. My name is Laura Flower-Kim. I'm the Associate Director of ISP. And so beyond today's talk, we really hope that you'll join us again on Zoom Thursday at noon for a talk on diplomacy, politics, and power with guest presenters, US diplomat and former US Ambassador to Cyprus, Kathleen Doherty, and Mike Nelson, Caltech alumnus and director of the Carnegie Endowment's Technology and International Affairs Program. And on Friday at noon, also on Zoom, we get to travel to Kazakhstan with our very own Caltech graduate student, Altin, who is from the world's largest landlocked country, and she's going to share her unique culture with all of us. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. So I want to tell you how this invitation came about. So I received in the mail my Westways magazine for the spring 2021 edition, opened it up and saw this headline, Ramen Obsession, and I was obsessed. My family is obsessed with ramen. I know we all are, right? So it really caught my eye. I was reading this, my mouth was watering, and I was like, wow, this writer is amazing. And so I started looking her up. It's Rachel, and I'm thinking, well, where's she been all my life? And so I started Googling her. I wanted to know what else she had done. And I thought, this could be a great topic for a World Fest. And so, of course, the internet led me to other articles, including why does the US have so many Chinatowns? Why cruise ships are setting sail again as COVID is raging? Volcano tourism is booming, but is it too risky? Those are some of her recent titles that I would encourage you all to look up. She has written on themes of food, travel, history, culture, and just seemed like the perfect fit for us at World Fest. But how do you find her? Well, it turned out to be easier than I thought. She's on LinkedIn. I messaged her. She messaged me right back and said, I'd love to talk. And then it turned out she was an international student herself back in the day. So it was a perfect connection and combination, and we're just so thrilled to have her here. So now to the formal introduction. Rachel Ng is an award-winning writer and editor who has been published in National Geographic Travel, National Geographic Family, Rachel Ray Everyday, Men's Journal, and Bon Appetit. And she is currently the digital managing director and food editor at AAA Westways and AAA Explorer magazine. And you can follow her on Instagram at Rachel Loves Chicken. So please, Rachel, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. It's funny, the way this story came about when I was writing about Singapore food was I saw a news story about Singapore food getting in the UNESCO status. And I was born and raised in Singapore. I came to the United States in 1995. I went to Cal State Fullerton. And so Singapore is always near and dear to my heart. I try to go back every year or every other year, but because of COVID, it's been a while. So as I was researching this story, it really brought me back, and I learned so much more about my culture, my own culture, that I'm very excited to share with you today. So I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. And if you have any questions, let Laura know. You can jump in anytime. And after this, I'm happy to answer any of your questions that you have. I hope you have your lunch ready or have already eaten, because I promise you, you're going to be hungry after this. So I'm going to share the presentation. Okay. Singapore's iconic but endangered street food, and how it became a UNESCO status. Oh, whoops. Is that working? Okay. Where in the world is Singapore? This is the world map. And if you see, zoom in like under China, under Malaysia, I circled it. It's so little that often on the map, the dot that indicates where the country is bigger than the actual country. And we have a little nickname for it. We call it the little red dot, and that's where Singapore is. And way back when, before it was a British colony, it used to be an old fishing village with a population of about 1,000. And it was part of Malaya. And in 1819, the East India Company, which is a British company, basically set sail all over to Indonesia, to India, and basically that's how the colonization started. and they founded Singapore in 1819. They were looking for a port, sort of a trading port, sort of an in-between. And Singapore was sort of a perfect location because it had deep waters where the boat can come all the way to the island without having to like dock far away. And this little guy in the bottom, fun fact, that is William Farquhar. He was the first resident of Singapore, and he is the fifth great grandfather of the current Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So, fun fact.
Uh-huh.
So Sir Stamford, he didn't stay very long, Stamford Raffles. He came, he signed a treaty, and basically that's how the colonization of Singapore started. So that was 1,000 people. The natives were, the indigenous people were the Malays. And what happened after that was in the 10 years after Singapore was founded, migrants came from all over, mostly from China, to work as laborers, and also from India, who came to work as sort of the military presence and the police presence. So it went from a tiny little fishing village and it kind of exploded. And as you can tell from all these photos, a lot of these people were men, bachelors who came for work, and they came and they need food, they need nourishment. And that's how the emergence of itinerant hawkers came about. And basically back in the day, these were people who were peddling food. They were mobile. It's kind of like your modern food truck. They carried everything on their backs. Some of them carried tables and chairs along with them, and they would cook these hot meals for these laborers to keep them fed so they can keep working. And this was sort of the beginnings of the country where the racial sort of population would sort of interact with each other. So the satay men, who are usually Malays and indigenous, they would bring their skewers and peanut sauces to like the Chinese communities, and the Chinese noodle maker would bring their food to like other communities as well. And so a lot of the food in Singaporean culture today sort of started from there, where there's intermingling of food and different techniques that they sort of cultivated. And then it was very popular, so it got crowded really, really fast. And what happened was they were sort of crowding the streets, and it wasn't the most sanitary sort of situation back then. They were cooking in front of houses, they were pouring, they were cleaning right there. There was just rodents and cholera and all sorts of, you can see it's very messy, but very delicious still. And so the government then were trying to figure out, how do we solve, see the guy in the corner? He's carrying all those chairs with him. They're trying to figure out how to sort of decongest the streets and also kind of promote a more sanitary and sheltered situation. And that was sort of the start of the Hawker Center. The first one was built in 1922, and I believe this is the right one, and it cost $9,000 to construct. And really it was just a simple building where they had running water, where they can clean their wares, and also it's kind of served as protection, because back then there were a lot of sort of gang activity, and these gang members would go and sort of extort from the different vendors for protection money, like give me a piece of your money and, you won't be disturbed. And so this is kind of a way where the government can help protect the people and sort of give them a place to locate. And this was also around the time of World War I. So it kind of came and went. It started, but, nothing really happened of it. These were some of the early ones as well. It's kind of like what you would see in a lot of Southeast Asian countries, even today, like Thailand or Indonesia, a lot of outdoors type of situation. This is an indoor market. A lot of times with these hawkers, there were peddlers who peddled fresh fruits and vegetables, and then there were peddlers who peddled hot food. And so a lot of times it's sort of a symbiotic relationship where the fresh food suppliers would supply the vendors with their ingredients so they can prepare for the day. In 1929 was one of the first built shelter, and it's actually the last remaining one that is still in Singapore today. You can see some of the architecture is kind of similar, but it's just a more concrete structure. And then in the 1950s, they started experimenting with all these new neighborhoods where they would have housing along with food and, you know, medical supplies and hospitals, schools and all that. So this was kind of like the beginning, but it's still 1951, so it's still under British colonial rule. There used to be cops just basically cracking down on the illegal hawking, which was still prevalent. I think for the Singaporean people, they still loved it. And in a weird way, it was kind of a better food for them because there's a little bit of a risky element to it, but they were cracking down on it, really trying to contain the illegal hawking. And in the 60s, Singapore gained independence in 1965, August 9, 1965. And that's when the colonial government gave over the authority to rule the country to Singaporeans. And back then, they basically inherited a lot of issues with slums, a lot of, I think at that time there were like 25,000 illegal hawkers still around town. And so they were trying to come up with a solution on how to give shelter to these places and also figure out the housing situation. And what the government did was they bought up all these land from private owners. So I think currently in Singapore, 80% of the land in Singapore is owned by the Singapore government, and people can buy affordable housing from them. And so this was kind of the start of that. They call it new towns. And this is kind of like the before intermittent space where what housing used to look like in the foreground, and in the background are the new, they call it HDB, which is how I think the Housing Development Board buildings. And so these neighborhoods, like the ones before, are very self-contained. There's parks, there's clinics, and housing, schools, transportation, employment, and also a food center where they sell fresh fruits and vegetables and fish and meats in the first floor. And then on the second floor is where the vendors are selling cooked foods. And a lot of what the Singapore government did was they made sure that each housing unit and each hawker center had sort of a, not equal, but like a fair distribution of different ethnicities and race. So there's, a certain percentage of Chinese, a certain percentage of Malay, a certain percentage of Indians, and made sure that there are dietary options for everybody. And it's kind of also a way where they knew in the 60s, there was kind of a lot of racial tension between the different ethnic groups. And it was a way for people to, instead of, segregating, they made an effort to really incorporate everybody. And it was an entry point for a lot of people. Singapore's majority Chinese. And so for them, they've never had halal food, by Malays. It's a way for them to try it without being intimidated while going into a restaurant that they've never been to. You basically, these are all stalls. You can order from any one of them. You can bring your food back into the community table. It's kind of like the food hall of what you're familiar today. And so there were a few different types of development with these hawker centers. So first of them, this was in Jurong, which is mostly an industrial area in Singapore where there was a lot of factories. And so they made sure that there was food options for all the factory workers so they don't have to travel very far during their lunchtime. And then there's the other one that are sort of tourist destinations where, a lot of the tourists sort of center around the town, which is the south side of the island. And so instead of having to go into the neighborhood and the community, they built these really beautiful hawker centers where tourists can come. And as you can see, they kind of replicated what was special and unique about hawker food in the old days, where you can take on the streets and dine al fresco. There's also in sort of beachside neighborhoods and in sort of private non-government areas, there are also really cool hawker centers that you can visit. And this one is another one. It's near town. It's near that beautiful hotel I'm sure you've seen in movies with a big boat on top. That's the infinity pool. And some of the hawker centers also had sort of the ethnic heritage sort of incorporated into the architecture. This is in Geylang Seraya, which is a predominantly Muslim Malay neighborhood. So a lot of the stalls in there have halal food, and it's the best place to go if you want good halal food. And actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the breakdown. So back in the day when they were developing these hawker centers, it was sort of a way to house the hawkers. And a lot of times people go into the business because they really didn't have anything else. It's sort of their way of starting their own business with basically what they had. And it was very entrepreneurial. But during that time, the government really wanted people to go into industrialization where we're making things or manufacturing things. So there was a big period of time where the Singapore government wasn't very enthusiastic about having new hawkers. They basically housed all the hawkers that were out there, and they wanted everybody to focus on manufacturing. And so for a period of 20 years, they didn't build any new hawker centers. And in 2000, I believe, the government decided, hey, we're going to build some new hawker centers. And the people were like, but who's going to be taking over those spots? Who's going to be working on them? Because for a whole generation, we've been told to go to school, go to college, get a degree, be a doctor, be an engineer, be an accountant, be a lawyer, but there was never really a path to go into hawkering. And unless maybe your family has a hawker stall where, you've been cooking all your life and you're learning for your wares, which is where the new generation of hawkers are coming from. This is Habib Muhammad. I had interviewed him for this story. The stall was named after him by his father when his father founded it, and he was only 1 year old. So it's almost like he was preordained to take over the stall. And he started helping out his dad at 6 years old. Go to the market with him at like 6 o'clock in the morning to get all the fresh ingredients. And his job was to peel hard-boiled eggs and, chop onions. And he decided to start helping out his parents because they were old, and it's a really, really tiring job. I believe he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning, he goes to the market, he preps everything, and he works until like 10 o'clock at night. So it's a very laborious job. But if you can totally YouTube him, and you can find videos of the line that snakes outside of his stall. People wait hours for his, this is called rojak, which is sort of like an Indian salad. There's a lot of fried fritters, fried fish cake, and hard-boiled eggs and fried potatoes, and it's kind of like all mixed together with this spicy orange gravy. So this is sort of the new generation of hawkers that are coming up. This is Douglas Ung. He is a first-generation hawker. So he went to school for engineering, and but he really, really loved food, and he really wanted to open a restaurant. And this was, for a lot of young people, this was sort of their entryway in getting into the food business, because hawker centers are a pretty easy and cheap way of starting a new business. So he loves fish balls, which is kind of like a white fish paste that's sort of, how do I say it? It's ground and it's boiled, and it's delicious. It's one of my favorite things. And his grandmother made it, and he tried to get the recipe from his grandmother, which he said was very difficult because she didn't have a recipe. So for 3 months, he followed her around with a video camera, just to videotape everything that she's doing. And he opened quite a few stalls and has been very, very successful. Let's see, so the rent averages for each stall is about $1,000 a month, and it's about a 10 by 10 foot space. So for somebody who wanted to start a business, it's actually a very affordable way of doing that.
Rachel, do you have a moment for a question? We have Diana who has a question. Diana or Diana, would you like to ask your question? Sorry. Okay, we'll move on. Sorry.
She's on mute, so maybe. Oh, okay. Oh, and then there's a whole new other generation on top of the food that people are used to. They're basically making paellas, they're making burgers, they're making pizzas. These are actually a little bit more tricky because people who go to hawker centers are very used to sort of more ethnic food, Chinese food, Malay food, Indian food. And so like this Western one, it's new, but it's popular with the younger folks for sure. Let's see. So hawker centers, so for a long time, you know, with hawker centers, these older generation, they basically do like 1 or 2 dishes really, really well. And they've been doing it for 20, 30, 50 years. And so a lot of these young people, they have to compete with sort of that legacy. And, you know, they have to come up with different innovative ways to really shine. Right now, there are 114 hawker centers in Singapore. It's a very small country. And on average, it's about 100 or so stalls within each hawker center. So you're talking about thousands and thousands of people, you know, trying to get your lunch money and trying to, you know, get you to go to their stalls. So it's a little bit difficult to stand out. But the ones, I think I talked to Dr. Leslie Tay, and he said that, you know, a lot of them are just making a living. There are some superstars, you know, some of them have gotten Michelin stars. Some of them are, you know, profiled in magazines, but for a majority of them, it's just simple food so that they can put, you know, they can bring home an income and they can send their kids to school. I'm going to get that. Does anybody have any questions so far about the history? I'm going to go in my top 10 favorite hawker food in a little bit, but I'll talk a little bit about the UNESCO status and what really made this a contender and worthy of a UNESCO status. So basically, the intangible cultural for UNESCO is something that's not, it's not a building, it's not an old architecture of any sort, it's something that's intangible. And, you know, when this UNESCO designation was announced, you know, people from the neighboring countries like, what are you talking about? Like, Thailand has the best street food, or Malaysia has the best street food. And, you know, it's like, they really are street food. And that's actually not what the UNESCO designation was for. It is for street food, but it really was for the idea that the government should have set up the space where people in the community can have, you know, a cheap, hearty meal. And it's that planning, that sort of urban planning that really, I think, made it stand out and made it different. That it's not just, you know, you're kind of out there and you're doing things on your own, but it's a very manufactured way of getting people together. Because in Singapore, like America, it is a very racially diverse country. There is no one Singaporean, because everybody, as you can see, other than the indigenous Malays, came from somewhere else. And so when that happens, you know, there's always going to be some kind of tension. And the way that the government, you know, back in the 60s in the US, you know, you can still see there's a lot of segregation with schools and all that. But in Singapore, they were like, that's not the way to do it. And so even within these government housing, there is a hierarchy of income level as well. So not only are you sort of integrating everybody from different ethnicities, but you're also integrating everybody from different income groups. And so in the kind of the way, you know, you sort of have an affinity for your own neighborhood, and that would sort of expand. So if you never have to leave your neighborhood if you don't want to, a lot of times people are like, you know, let's go downstairs, you know, going downstairs means getting something to eat. Going downstairs means playing chess at the community chess table, or playing basketball with your neighbors. And to me, that's really what made it stand out. It's the food, of course, the food is amazing, but it's definitely more than just about the food. It's about the community and the culture. And a lot of times, you know, we were talking about, the government doesn't quite promote, you know, they want the country to be a first world country where it's focused on technology and medical and all that stuff, but to be, I feel like, a fully diverse country, you know, the food aspect is also very important. And part of the UNESCO is you have to commit to keeping it as a cultural heritage. So what the government is doing now is there's a lot of older generation hawkers who are retiring and they don't have anybody to take over their business. So they're partnering them up with young up and comers and basically paying these older hawkers a fee to mentor and train the next generation. And the next generation would have a subsidized rental into, to get a stall. They'll get like a subsidy to get them started for the first few years, and hoping to kind of encourage, the next generation of hawkers. And a lot of the older hawker centers are closing down. That makes me a little bit sad, but as a historian said, the culture will always change and evolve. And as long as sort of the essence of it is still there, that's sort of how you carry it on. Any questions?
One question so far is in the chat is, will you be able to share the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. I know we're going to share the recording. I think we'll be able to put that back on the WorldFest webpage, but thank you for, maybe we can put the slides up separately as well.
Absolutely.
And Cam has a question.
Yes, I just submitted it via the chat. But basically my question is, why do you think hawkering became such a central part, it seems from how you're describing it, to the government's planning in the development and the transition of the country from being formerly a British colony to being an independent? I know there are different ethnic groups, and it actually seems pretty genius to recognize and then try to incorporate and blend the various ethnic groups' important element like cooking, and
right.
But there were other potential things that could have been used sort of as poll stars for the government prior to, in the 1920s and way back. But why do you think hawkering made it to the top of the list? It just seems to me, as you've described it, as a way for the government to orient the future for the country.
Right. That's actually a really good question. And I think it all goes back. So, I think hawkering came up because people needed employment. Back in the day, it was something that they could start themselves. Sometimes it's very, very simple. I remember when I was a kid, there was just this guy, and he made this, it's kind of like a mochi thing made out of rice flour, and you steam it and you mix it with this ground peanut and sugar combination. It was only like, I don't know, 50 cents or something like that. But the ingredients that he needed to start it was very, very inexpensive. So it's a way for somebody to make a living for themselves. And as it became very, very popular, the government saw it as a nuisance. It was a kind of like a hygiene kind of issue. It was a sort of a cluttering and congestion kind of issue. And they tried to, in the early 1900s, they tried to get rid of it. And there was a huge, just outroar from the public. They loved hawkering despite all the sanitary issues. They loved it. And, and so I think that the British government, the municipal government back then, were not able to demolish it because of the popular demand. And, a lot of times in Singapore, the kitchens are small. And so it's actually less expensive to go out to eat than it is to cook at home. And so I think when, the government was sort of planning after they took over from the colonials, they're trying to plan, it kind of went from like third world to first world in a very accelerated pace. And the government's like, I want you to work. Don't worry about spending time in the kitchen. Don't worry about going to the market and buying fresh food. Like, work, there's going to be food there. You're going to be okay. And so I think that's part of it as well. And as you mentioned too, it's the sort of the diversity of like, sometimes for a lot of people, myself included, my first entry point into any culture is through the food, because for me, like, food is so unifying. You might not be familiar with, say, the cuisine, but you might be familiar with the ingredients. It might be something that you use in your own cooking. And in the early days, there were, migrants coming from different countries, and China and India coming into like a Southeast Asian country that's in the rainforest right on the equator, the kinds of ingredients are that are available are going to be different. And so a lot of times the food that comes in here, like one of the more famous dishes is an Indian dish. It's a fish head curry, and in India nobody uses fish head in their curry. And the reason that dish evolved was because they saw the Chinese were like discarding the fish head, and they're like, hey, that's really good protein, and there's like giant fish head, there's a lot of meat on it. And they started incorporating that, and the spices that you find in Southeast Asia are a little bit different from the spices you would find in China. So a lot of the Chinese food in Singapore have a spice element to it, a tangy element to it. And so I think in the early days the food sort of mingled together. And as generations went by, our cultures mingled together, and there's like intermarriages between the different ethnicities, and there's sort of conversion from one religious group to another religious group. And so I think knowing that, the government knowing that there is no one singular identity in Singapore, that it was very important to embrace all the cultures. And so everything in Singapore is in 4 languages: Indian, Malay, Chinese, and English. We celebrate all religious holidays, Easter and Christmas and Ramadan, and basically like the Deepavali, like all the religious holidays are public holidays. And all the street signs are in all the languages. So I think the government knowing that if all citizens sort of should get equal, and then the numbers are a little bit different. There is a majority Chinese, but they try really very hard to make sure all the cultures are incorporated in Singapore. So I think that was part of the planning too. It's just like, if you had a chance to start something from scratch, it's like, here's the land in the 60s, like how would you sort of create, a neighborhood that was harmonious? I think that's part of it. And the food part, because it does bring people together and it brings people in the same space together, that would help with understanding each other, even if they're maybe culturally different. In the Singapore, we call them flats, the government housing. On the ground floor, it's usually an open space. We call the void deck. And there's usually chess tables there, but that's where people sometimes have events. So you might have a wedding there one day or a funeral there another day. It's sort of like a common area that kind of brings people together. And I think that was really essential to how they were scaling these neighborhoods. Is back in the day, we call them kampongs, which is like the little fishing villages. It's a very one unit kind of thing. And I think they were trying to replicate that with the housing, is to sort of have a community within that neighborhood so people would feel more like a buy-in into it. All right, any more questions about the hawker? All right, we're gonna go into my top 10, and this was very difficult because I might have a little bit more than top 10, but every time I go back to Singapore, these are the food I have to eat. And first of all, it's chicken rice. And the reason why my Instagram is Rachel Loves Chicken. This is a Hainanese dish, which you kind of could find in Hainan in China, which they call the Hawaii of China, but not really. So this is poached chicken. So you poach the chicken, and then after it's cooked, you dunk it in ice, and then you kind of cool it really quickly. And so it's very moist and very delicious, and it's served with this ginger garlicky rice that I can eat every day. And Malaysia has a really good version, but I think the Singapore version is the best. Hokkien mee is from the Fujian province in China, and it's like an egg noodle, rice noodle in this shrimp seafood broth. And believe it or not, people eat this for breakfast because there's eggs in it, but you can eat it any time of the day. Really good after, drinks at night. This is like hearty, carb-filled, delicious food. Roti prata, it's an Indian dish. It's kind of like a flatbread. The texture is kind of like a croissant, if you can believe it. It's kind of folded many, many times with lots and lots and lots of ghee. which is clarified butter, and then it's pan fried. It's amazing. You can dunk it in curry or dip it in sugar. Some people do that. You can have eggs in it. It can be like super thin. It's pretty crazy how customized it can be. And you can also eat this with ice cream. Yes, there's a whole thing.
Okay, Rachel, sorry, I have to interrupt because roti is my absolute favorite in the world. It's the best thing I've ever tried, and I had it on the street in Malaysia.
Oh, yes.
Any chance there's a place in the LA area that sells that to your liking?
I believe, well, okay. They have them in grocery stores like Ranch 99 frozen, and that's not bad. It's a little bit greasy, so you want to like pat it off with some paper towels in between. But I believe, I don't remember top of my head, but there's a couple restaurants in Alhambra, which is not far from Pasadena, that has roti. And there was a restaurant that I think has since closed, but I will, if you want notes after this, I can send you my recommendations of places that you can try these. But swear to God, I've been all over. It's very difficult to find super authentic. So as Singaporeans would say, it's not bad. Not bad is pretty good. All right, char kway teow. It's another Chinese dish. It's like flat rice noodles with yellow noodles and shrimp and blood cockles with a squeeze of lime, and it's cooked in like dark soy sauce. So it's kind of like molasses. And part of the beauty of it is the wok has to be super, super hot. So it's kind of like searing. So there's kind of like almost like a little burnt, like when you get barbecue, there's like a little burnt taste to it. That's what makes a really good char kway teow. And then, oh, I had the wrong slide. This is nasi lemak. This is not laksa on the right. And it's a Malay dish. And it's basically rice cooked in coconut cream. And it's served for breakfast because there's an egg. But I love it with fried chicken. And it's usually served with anchovies and peanuts. And there is a lady, a Malaysian lady in LA who does these catering. I can share her Instagram. You can pick up her, you can make an order and then drive to wherever her drop-off point is. Pop your trunk. She puts the food in, and then you can drive home with lunch ready. And I will share that later as well. Okay. Kaya toast. It's notice we eat a lot of breakfast, I feel like, but these are usually around all day long. So kaya toast, it's a coconut jam made with lots of sugar, coconut cream, and this leaf called pandan leaf, which is kind of like an Asian vanilla. It's kind of like a long screw pine, and it's wedged between toast and a thick slab of butter, cold butter in there. And you usually eat it with sort of like soft boiled eggs with soy sauce and a little bit of white pepper. And then you drink it with coffee, which is usually, I like it with condensed milk. And then the next dish, laksa, it's sort of a Malay Chinese hybrid. It's like a coconut curry broth, and there's some around the LA area that's okay, not bad. And it's like rice noodles, and notice you eat it with a spoon, you don't eat it with a chopstick. Say they cut the noodles so small, you just kind of like slurp it up. And there's always like a little dollop of sambal, which is like a shrimp paste, chili paste thing. It's pretty pungent, but very delicious. You can also eat that for breakfast. Satay, I would say the satay that you'll find in America is a little bit different from the satay you would find in Singapore. Asians love dark meat, so it's usually dark meat. It's marinated in this beautiful soy kind of marinade, and then it's, cooked over charcoal, so it gets that nice barbecue taste too. And bak chor mee is a Chinese dish with like yellow noodles, vinegar, black vinegar, mushrooms, marinated mushrooms, ground pork usually, and fish balls. And then this is what we call a carrot cake. It does not look like, when I first came to America and I ordered a carrot cake, I'm like, what on earth am I eating? Because this is what I know a carrot cake to be. It's basically grated daikon that you steam with like rice flour. And so it's kind of like It's not chewy like mochi, but it's a little bit of a similar texture. And you also eat this for breakfast. It's fried with eggs. You can have it light or you can have it dark. Dark is when they put a molasses, dark soy sauce on top of it. And you also eat it with chili. And then desserts. Asians aren't very big on desserts, but we have sort of our version of shaved ice. And yes, that's corn and red beans you see on top of it. But trust me, it's delicious. It's got like these sweet rose syrup, condensed milk. Usually that's what this uncle, I call him uncle, is squirting into it. And sometimes it has Jello in it. It's very refreshing. And then for drinks, we usually would have like soy milk or sugarcane or sugarcane juice, which is really just a sugarcane where you just press it until all the juices come out. It's pure sugar. Or something we call grass jelly, which is sort of an herbal kind of taste of drinks. Or whatever you can notice from the picture of the drinks below, but they serve it in plastic bags. You put a straw in it and you drink it out of a plastic bag. It's super old school. I don't know if it's still around. I mean, you can tell that's a coin payphone in that picture. So it might be pretty rare to see it now. And then I'd say this might be the last of the roaming vendors in Singapore that you might find. I call him the ice cream uncle. I mean, I think there's like maybe 5 around, and he serves ice cream for very affordable. And our ice cream sandwich are usually in bread. It's a very colorful rainbow bread, but it tastes like white bread. It's kind of strange. And then he puts a wedge of ice cream in it, and it's really good. So if you go to Singapore, download this slide and just go to your nearest hawker center. I'm pretty sure, other than the ice cream man, all of them you can find in a single hawker center. And if you're ever there, just look for the longest line and stand in line and ask the person next to you what they would order. What's fascinating, I think, about these vendors is like this guy, you can tell him like, I want more noodles. You can tell him I want more eggs. You can tell him I don't want as much oil. They will customize. This is better than Chipotle. They will customize your individual order because everything is cooked to order. So you place your order and they make it right there and then. So for something like this, it's maybe $3 to $5 and you can have a really delicious meal. So that is all I have. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
So it might be easiest if you raise a hand and we'll call on you, but we would love to have some interaction here if you have any questions for Rachel. Amanda?
Hi, I would love to hear about your recommendations about like LA restaurants in the area to try like this different Singapore food. I know like somebody else in the chat also asked this too.
Okay, I knew this question was going to come up, but okay, so to be legit, all right, and I might need to DM you on that one, but the best Singaporean / Malaysian food, because a lot of our food are very, very similar, is kind of underground. Like there are secret Facebook groups you can join and you place orders and then you go to like random parking lots in like San Gabriel Valley or, you know, Walnut or somewhere or Irvine, and you collect your food. And I actually know of a handful that my friends have been telling me, and I've been going. It was especially helpful during COVID where you can't even go to restaurants anyway. There is a restaurant in LA called, I believe it's called Cassian, but I will double check on that. And it is run by a Singaporean, but his food is very high end. And so it's like gourmet street food, which is fine. It's good if you've never had the original, but I think for me, if you've had the original, it's like it's a very upscale version. So it's very, very tasty, but it's not quite Singaporean food. There is a restaurant in Tustin that has some of the food I had mentioned. But again, it's a little bit difficult, I think. They opened a restaurant in San Francisco, and I know Singaporeans are they had this festival one time, and all my friends in LA drove up to San Francisco just to eat the food. So there's that. But let me come up with a list. If Laura can coordinate this, I'll give you where I would go for specific food. And that might help. But if you really want good Chinese food that's not Singaporean or Singaporean adjacent, I would say Intangible Valley is the best place for any kind of Asian food. A lot of the Chinese food in Singapore tend to be more Teochew, Chaozhou, which there are a few restaurants in Intangible Valley that specializes in that. My favorite chicken rice place, and I believe they have a new owner, so I haven't been back. It's called Green Zone, and that's in Alhambra. And to me, that was the most legit. But I make the most legit chicken rice. So if
Well, you need to start a business
if we
then,
have a
'cause
big party,
you're going to
I'll
have
make some
50
chicken rice.
customers.
I think the problem with chicken rice, especially, it's because it's a very chickeny dish because it's just chicken. And so you have to buy really fresh chicken that's never been frozen. And then you have to cook it at a very, very low temperature for an hour. And so it doesn't quite meet American food standard. Because if you go there, like there's gonna be a little pink situation, but the chicken is really, really fresh. So you really don't have to worry about it. And in Singapore, the government is really, really strict on all your health inspections. Everybody gets inspected very regularly. So it's probably the safest in Southeast Asia to have street food in Singapore. But if we have a party, Laura, I'll make some chicken rice and everybody can come.
Yes, it's a date. We're having you back for sure. Ellen, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks so much for your talk. It was really interesting to learn about the culture and the food. I have a question regarding the seasonality. So I was wondering if there's a seasonality to the food that's served throughout the year, and whether you have a recommended season to visit Singapore to try the food.
Not so much the hawker food. It's pretty much year round, but I would highly recommend going during Chinese New Year, because that's when some of the places have very specialized Chinese New Year types of food. So we have one thing we call the lo hei, which is like a big old salad, right? It's big, it's got julienne, like carrots and daikon, and some kind of raw fish and peanuts. And what people do during Chinese New Year is everybody grabs a chopstick and you toss the salad all together, really, really high. You want to make a big old mess. And then you kind of yell out like prosperous saying as you're tossing the salad. And it's super fun if you want to get together with a group of friends to do that. And that's usually available throughout everywhere during Chinese New Year. Any restaurants you go, they would have specialties like that. Or if you go during like a Muslim holiday like Ramadan, they would have outdoor street markets where that slide with the beautiful geometric shape. So they would basically like block off the streets and have a night market we call pasar malam. And they would have all these different vendors there just cooking kind of different kinds of specialty food. And some of them are very adventurous, some of them are very, very different. I would say that's a really good time to go too. Hopefully everybody's, vaccinated because it can get super crowded. But those are really fun. Like, I think there's like the old school, like the legit places you always want to go for a really good meal. And I think there's also a lot of fun in young people coming up with random stuff. And you're like, hey, that's pretty tasty, or that's really fun. So any kind of holidays, I think would be the best time to go. But it's on the equator. So it's the same season. Either it rains a lot or it doesn't rain a lot, or it rains somewhat, but it's always going to be raining. It's always going to be hot. You can try December, but I think it's a little bit rainier. So it might hinder a little bit if you want to go like outdoor adventure type of things. And the good thing about Singapore too, there's a lot of outdoor things to do. I know a lot of people, when they watch movies and stuff, it's very like city-like, but they have these amazing hikes in these like reservoirs that you can see like monkeys and, peacocks and all sorts of things. And so you can work off, all the food that you're going to be eating. There's places in Singapore too where it doesn't close. It's open 24 hours. And a city and a country is obsessed with food when you're like in a bus at 11 o'clock at night and there's a line out the door for God knows what meal they're having at that point, but people are always eating. So there are hawker centers that are open 24 hours if you're really hungry at 2 o'clock in the morning, have nothing else to do.
Cool, thank you.
Cam, you have a question?
I guess I wanted to ask about the sources for the foods traditionally. Do they come from Singapore itself, or is some or much? And I know there's globalization today, so there's no car that's made in one country anymore. It comes from all over the place. But traditionally, has the raw stock for the foods been developed, grown in Singapore itself, or have the food stocks traditionally been imported into the country?
So you're talking about like raw ingredients like pork
Yes.
and all that? Oh yeah, we don't grow nothing. There used to be chickens around, there used to be like pigs around, but it's a very small country where like any kind of farming, there's a lot of pollution. And so a lot of, there's some farmers market type of things, there's some small farms, but a lot of the ingredients are imported from Malaysia, from China, from sort of nearby countries. It's kind of like one of those things where, as a country that is so young, it's founded in 1965, like my dad's older than the country, and to kind of form an identity for itself. And a lot of times in its way of going into the first world, I fear that it's leaving what makes it special behind. And, with the farming and all that stuff, when I was a kid, there was fish farms around, there were chicken farms, there were pig farms, but all those are sort of being outsourced because it's not the best use of space for a small country. And I'm hoping that the younger generation are sort of bringing that back here because, as everybody knows, like the local food, whatever is grown locally is best represented and tastes the best. And so, there's a little bit of difficulty, with supply for sure. We don't even have our own water. We have to buy it from Malaysia. So, so no, we don't have a lot of, we used to, but not anymore, not in the current government priorities.
You mentioned that some of the hawker centers actually are, I don't know if going out of business, but going vacant.
Yes.
What is being done with the structures? And we've had similar situations with our malls, our indoor malls. It's like sometimes they're popular, sometimes they're not. And when they go vacant, maybe they become a medical center or something. Is there some other use that's going into those?
Usually because those structures are built specifically for hawkers, so usually they would just demolish it and replace it with some other building. I was talking to one of the authors about, how sad it is, like all these places I used to go. He goes, yeah, when's the last time you went back? It's like people have a nostalgia about something, but they don't go enough for these business to sustain. So a lot of times we're just nostalgic for our memories rather than actually going and frequenting those businesses. And I think there is, if in order to save anything, you have to show it with your wallet. You have to go and you have to support, whatever businesses it is, if it's that important. I think that's what the government is doing, is if they deem it important, if they deem it something that sort of showcases the country to the world, then they need to preserve it by showing support. Because every time I go back, I do have friends who are like, oh, let's go to a restaurant, let's go to a tapas restaurant, or let's go, because usually those places have air conditioned in a very hot place that's very nice and pleasant. And hawker centers are usually, just a fan, so it's hot. If it rains, you might get wet. But I think for a tourist, or even somebody who's been away for a long time, that's what makes it special. And that's what sometimes people take for granted if it's something that they're so used to.
Thank you for mentioning. I was actually wondering what the competition was, because I loved in your story where you're saying, in the history that the Singaporean kitchens were so small that you really didn't cook for yourself, which never would have occurred to me. So has that changed? Has the structure of one's family situation or home changed? Or is it really just that there are so many other restaurant options out there?
I think Singaporeans love dining out. If they eat at home, they did takeout. For sure during COVID, a lot of these hawkers had to pivot to delivery. And my friends, when they get together, they're doing takeout where they make their own hot pot at home, but everything was kind of supplied to them. So as a generation, I had home ec in school, but that's not something that, or a lot of them have also like domestic help. And so sometimes their helpers cook the meals for them. But for a lot of Singaporeans, I don't think they're very much in the kitchen or they're making artisanal sourdough bread. You know, they're not making like because especially for hawker food, if you really like hawker food, it's a lot of labor for one dish, but because they focus on one dish, so they can make a big big pot of stock, or they can have all the noodles all ready for them. So even though it's time consuming to prep all those, when it's assembled, you know, it's pretty fast, and economically it's very affordable. So for, you know, even I try to make pho at home one day, and I think it costs like $30 to make pho when I can go down the street for a $6 pho. So because I'm only just making one portion, whereas the restaurants make a huge portion. So sometimes there's that too. If you really like hawker food, it's just cheaper and faster to get it outside, and better, honestly.
Yeah.
There's oh, go ahead.
No, I don't want to stop you, but I do want to acknowledge that we are almost at the hour, and I know some people have to get to class and different things, but do you have a few more minutes if we have some more questions?
Yeah.
Okay. And just for everybody, I put in the chat the link to Rachel's article on the Singapore street food. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please do. It was so wonderful to hear a little bit more of the story and the history through your presentation today. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We have a question from Marin. Marin? Oh, no, sorry, I apologize. That was a clap.
Just expressing my appreciation. This was so wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I will ask one more question if you don't mind, because in listening to your story and also what you just said about how, you know, the things have changed and you have to kind of vote with your dollars, right? So when you were doing the research on this piece, did you talk to your parents? And did you talk with them about like what is their memory of the hawker centers and over the years and impressions of the changes?
Not my parents. Okay, so my mom's Japanese. And so she's not local, but my mom's a cooking teacher when she lived in Singapore. And she would take these Japanese expat housewives to the markets and show them all the different local food and kind of show them around, because it's kind of intimidating if you don't live there, if you're going into the neighborhoods. And my dad lives in Shanghai, so he hasn't been home for a while. But I talked to some of these food bloggers and historians and all that, and it's interesting. I think until you've been away from home, and I'm sure all y'all, you know, international students can relate, you don't realize what you miss until you don't have it anymore. And I think a lot of overseas Singaporeans are very, very, like, they go back just for the food. I mean, family and then food, like right after the other. And so I think whatever, you know, for students, whatever the thing that's the most important to you, you don't realize until you leave your home and then you come to a new country and you go like, wow, I had it really good, or that was really special, or yeah, that's my feeling. I think the ones that never left are the ones that are like, I'm gonna go have a burger today, instead of like really understanding what they have, which is really good. And I've had burgers in Singapore, and it's, you know, it's burgers you have in America. Singapore, you want some Chinese food. I want some Chinese food.
Okay, so I hope everybody Googles you. And I think what I'm going to do on the webpage is put links to some more of your articles. Is there something that you're working on next that you can just tell us, you know, career-wise, that you're excited about? What's your next story?
Okay, so I'm writing a story for Nat Geo, and right now I'm in like rabbit deep dive mode, and it's about the Japanese internment camp in Hawaii, which a lot of people don't know that there was one, and a lot of Hawaiians don't know that as well. And it's very interesting to me because it's like, you know, this year's the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, and you know, we all know what happened in Pearl Harbor, you know, the Japanese attack America, and then you kind of don't know what happened after Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And that's what my story is going to be about, is life in Hawaii after the Pearl Harbor attack. It was the first, I believe, and only state, and back then it wasn't a state yet, but it was territory, but it was under martial law. So life was very different in Hawaii back then. The beaches had barbed wires because they were afraid of attacks. And so I really wanted to do like a deep dive into, it's a tourist attraction. You know, Hawaii, everybody loves Hawaii. It's all aloha spirit, but it did have a challenging time during the war. it's been harder to find materials about that. So I think it's a worthy story to tell just because it hasn't been told as much as some of the other stories in internment camp. So that's what I'm working on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I look forward to reading that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I don't want to let you go because I could talk to you forever and just hear more stories. It would help with the food in front of us next time, maybe, but thank you all for attending, and we do hope to see you again Thursday and Friday for the other World Fest programs. So thanks.
Thank you so much. It's been
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.